chapter 1 and our first lesson here, 5 themes of geography. As we get started off this week, you need to make sure that you read through this entire section, maybe take some notes on what I talk about as well as what you read throughout this week. And so we're going to cover those 5 themes of geography today, and then we're going to talk about them in class when we meet next time. So make sure you follow along, and you can go back and reread through this. But we begin here understanding what is geography and what does it mean. And so we start off with the study of the distribute. Yes, we are going to need to know this. This is a question that is going to show up in the test later on, so make sure that you know this. I know many of you are thinking that. So it's a study of the distribution and interaction of physical and human features on Earth. So that's the textbook definition, and hopefully as we go along, you're going to understand more about what that means and how that works as we understand more about geography. So as we move on and look at some of the methods of geography and some of the tools that are used, maps are typically the first thing we think of when we are talking about geography. I know most of us are used to pulling out our phones and using MapQuest or Google Maps or Siri or whatever it is that you use, but those are all part of the methods to help us navigate where we're going. And so that's one of the tools that we will study as we get into geography. Photographs are also important as well. And as we take those photos on our phone, as we take them and hang on to those things, it's going to help us remember certain aspects of the geography and what we saw there, what the characteristics were all about, so that we might be able to relate that as we differentiate between different regions and different parts of our globe. And then charts, tables, and graphs. Those are also important, helping us to understand and organize certain information that we get out of geography, and we will talk about some of those later on in the year. So, unfortunately, some of you are thinking Pokemon Go. That is really not applicable anything we're doing right now, so you can just put that away, take that thought out of your mind, and we are not going to be playing Pokemon at all as we are going through our class. So we talk about the first theme of geography. The first one here is location. As we talk about location, the first thing we need to understand is absolute location. So in absolute location, it is the exact place where a geographic feature is found. So when we are trying to find the absolute location, we can pinpoint that specifically on a globe, and we know where that's going to be because absolute location uses a grid system. Many of you have seen globes or maps that look kind of like this, and that's what these grids are, and we're going to learn about that and understand how that works, as the grid system is a system of imaginary lines that go throughout maps or our globe so that we can pinpoint the absolute location of a geographical feature. And in order to understand the grid system, we need to understand that our globe is divided into hemispheres. You can see here by the graphic on the screen, we've got the western hemisphere and the eastern hemisphere. And these are the two halves divided by the prime meridian. That is the line going north to south here, dividing the eastern and western hemispheres. So you need to know prime meridian there and make sure that you know it divides the east and west. And then we also have the equator on the right side of your graphic there. That would divide the northern and southern hemisphere. And so that is going to run right through the center, going horizontally, and the equator is that imaginary line that divides the northern and southern hemisphere. Now we also have to understand latitude. Latitude are the lines that run parallel to the equator line. So those are going to be horizontal-ish type lines as they run around our globe. The north to south lines are going to be longitude lines, and these are going to be the lines that are going to run over top of the poles. Now they don't always run exactly north to south, but it gives us an idea of how those work. And so as we find the intersecting point between latitude and longitude, we can find the absolute location of something. Now we also have relative location. Now relative location is important to help us describe a location in relation to other features around it. So if you're walking through a big city, and you're here, and you are really curious as to where the Starbucks is located. You're wondering, where in the world am I going to find the nearest Starbucks? And lo and behold, somebody points you in the direction of the corner right across the street and said, hey, there's a Starbucks right over there. You are less than a block away, and you can now go get your Starbucks. And if any of you know the nearest Starbucks, then please point me in that direction, and I'll be back in a few minutes. But it's important to know relative location, and this can change because it changes based on what feature you are describing or talking about relative to what you are looking for. The second theme of geography is place. Now, this is relatively simple. We are looking here at physical features, cultural landscapes of a location. As we try to describe the place, we might describe the climate. It's very warm, it's sunny, it's tropical, compared to it's very cold, frigid. It is winter-like, as you see in the contrasting pictures there. So we might describe the place as part of the climate, the landforms, maybe the vegetation that's there, or the environment as we describe those physical features. The third theme of geography is region. It is an area of the Earth's surface defined by shared characteristics. So we look at regions of the globe and we're going to see certain characteristics that are similar. So we might see a number of elements that unify a particular region together. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's political, maybe it's economic. Any of those characteristics would work. Now, there are three types of regions that we need to understand here. And the first one of these is a formal region. Formal regions are those that are defined by related characteristics. So when we look at the United States and Canada, they are related by landmass, and they're going to be a formal region. They are tied together that way. Their climate is generally similar, and so they would be part of that formal region. Europe would also be a formal region, or maybe you might say South America as a formal region. A functional region is characterized by a set of interaction and connections. So you might have the city and suburbs might be a functional region. You might look at the highways or the subways. You look at the interstate system. That would be a functional region that would work together because of the fact that the people are in a central location because of that, or they intersect or pass by one another as a result of that functional region. Now, the third one is perceptual, and the perceptual region, people perceive certain characteristics of a region the same way. So, for me, I think of the Great West and cowboys, and that is a perceptual region. For you all living here in the Midwest, you might think of farms, you might think of manufacturing, you might think of industry. Whatever it is that you think of here in the Midwest, I grew up on a farm, so for me, I typically think of farms as a perception of the Midwest. So that all can change from person to person, but generally they kind of fit together as we understand more about one another. Now, the fourth theme of geography is environmental interaction. As we look at the relationship between people and their environment, we're going to study how people interact and how people affect their environment. And people learn to use what the environment offers to them. They learn to live with certain parts of the environment that they cannot control. Certain climate areas, we adapt to that. We modify that. When it's cold outside, we wear a jacket. At least that's what our mom tells us. When it's hot outside, we might wear shorts and a t-shirt. And so we adapt to the environment around us. And we're going to study why people do that. And so sometimes we also work to change the environment to make it a little better place. We might make some adaptations to the way that our environment works. We are going to alter certain landscapes in order to make it fit for our cities or fit for a new building, or to be able to make a tunnel through a mountain to be able to drive through it. All those things are ways that we may adapt our environment in order to live in it a little bit better. And then sometimes those changes can cause certain consequences, and there are some that should be considered. Sometimes there's pollution that is involved in that. Yeah, I know. Doesn't look good, does it? But there are some side effects to our involvement with the environment. And although I'm not going to beat you over the head with all kinds of EPA regulations, there are certain things that we do need to be careful of as stewards of God's planet and God's world here, that we need to be careful that we are using his resources wisely, we're taking care of it. So we do need to consider the consequences for how we modify our environment and what we do to it. Our fifth and final theme of geography here is movement. And this is ways people, goods, and ideas move from place to place. Most of us probably traveled somewhere over the summer and have all kinds of experiences, which we are not going to take time to share at the moment. But we are going to look at all kinds of ways we travel, even goods. We think about Amazon or eBay. Bringing those things in are ways that we can study in geography and understand how they move from place to place. There are three types of distance, three types of movement and distance that we think about when we're talking about geography here. The first one is linear movement or linear distance. And we typically think about how far we are from something or how far across the earth a person may be or a product may have to travel. When you buy something off eBay and it says it's going to ship to you in 3 to 7 business days, you know that it should be here in that window, but most likely it's going to be 7 days until it gets there, unless you have Amazon Prime and it's guaranteed in 2 days. So we think about time as well. I might think about how much time it's going to take us to get to school in the morning, and it may take you 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, whatever it may be. When I was living in Atlanta, we had some really bad traffic, and I lived about 10 miles from the school where I was there, and we had to plan that when there was no traffic, we get to school in 15 minutes. But when there was traffic in the mornings, I would often plan 45 minutes to an hour, just depending upon whether somebody had decided that they were going to cut somebody off and get in an accident, or whether there was a flat tire, or just plain a lot of traffic going on that day. So you think about time as far as how long it's going to take you to get somewhere and how long it's going to travel. And then there's also psychological difference, or psychological movement as we look at time. When you were a kid, it seemed like it took forever to get to grandma's house. At least it did for me. And then as you grew older, it didn't take quite so much time. And that's all psychological. It's the same amount of time, the same amount of distance, but yet it seems like it's less time. Or maybe it's even your drive to school, and you think on the first week of school, man, it takes forever. Or as you go along throughout the year, well, it's not quite that much time. And it's all psychological. And so as we look at these three types of movement and distance, that's all important to understand as well.